Robinson's hearing started on Friday. And I have to tell you, listening to this hearing, I'm telling you right now, Tyler Robinson is not going to receive a fair trial. Things are already starting to go off the rails. The defense is basically being railroaded at this.
Let me be direct. Based on everything happening right now, it's starting to look like Tyler Robinson may not be getting a fair shot in court. Things are already beginning to fall apart, and the defense seems to be under serious pressure. In this video, I'm going to break down what happened during the latest hearing, along with a major development involving those alleged text messages linked to Tyler Robinson. Let's start with one of the biggest concerns raised by the defense. During the hearing, Robinson's attorneys point out something extremely troubling. According to the FBI and ATF, Robinson's DNA was supposedly found on a rifle trigger, on spent casings, and even on towels connected to the case. But here's the issue. None of that evidence has actually been handed over to the defense. Not physically, not digitally, nothing. So the obvious question is, if this evidence exists, why hasn't it been shared? The defense explained that the probable cause statement clearly mentions forensic testing and a DNA match. However, they say they still haven't received any of the actual reports, files, or physical evidence to back those claims up. That raises serious concerns. Think about it. This is a major criminal case, and the defense still doesn't have access to the evidence being used against their client. Under those circumstances, continuing the hearing doesn't make much sense. Because of that, the defense pushed for a delay. They asked the court to postpone proceedings until they could properly review the evidence. The judge, however, seemed unsure and questioned why this request wasn't made earlier. But the main issue remains the same. The defense says they still don't have what they need to properly do their job. What makes this even more shocking is that they haven't even been given access to the alleged murder weapon yet. All of this raises a bigger question about whether the process is being handled fairly. Now, moving on to another issue, the defense's level of preparation. There are reports suggesting that the defense team wasn't fully prepared to argue a motion they had already filed. When it came time to present their case in court, they didn't seem to have everything ready. This also brings attention to a broader reality. State-appointed attorneys. When someone can't afford a lawyer, the court provides one. But in many cases, these attorneys are stretched thin with limited time and resources compared to high-powered private legal teams. That's been a long-standing concern, and in this case, it's becoming part of the conversation again. During the hearing, the judge even asked why the defense didn't file their motion earlier, if they knew they needed more time. It's a fair question, but at the same time, the defense is arguing that they still haven't received the full evidence from the prosecution. And that right there is the core issue driving everything in this case. During the hearing, the defense tried to explain their position to the court. They acknowledged that they could have done a better job presenting their legal arguments earlier, but emphasized that they did file a motion to disqualify due to a potential conflict of interest. According to them, that motion implied something bigger, that the case should be handed off to a neutral authority. After doing additional research, even up until that very morning, the defense argued that the court has the power to refer the case to the Attorney General if the current prosecutors choose not to step aside. What made things even more concerning was a key detail revealed in court. There had been no communication at all between the county attorneys and the Attorney General's office about this issue. At that point, the defense made it clear this hearing should have been paused and rescheduled. And honestly, even from an outside perspective, that raises a serious question. If the defense still doesn't have access to critical evidence, why is the case moving forward at all? Why hasn't the FBI or ATF provided the data? Does that evidence even exist? For anyone who was undecided about the situation before, this moment definitely gives you something to think about. Because the reality is, the justice system often favors those with better resources. If you can't afford top-tier legal representation, you're already at a disadvantage. And situations like this only make that more obvious. Months have passed, and according to the defense, they still haven't received the necessary data from federal agencies. That alone is raising a lot of eyebrows. At one point, the defense attorney even said they were willing to take responsibility if the court felt they should have raised these concerns sooner. They explained that they've been dealing with multiple complex issues at once. Some the court knows about, and some it may not. The judge responded by saying there was no intention to penalize them and acknowledged that cases like this can evolve over time. However, the judge also emphasized the importance of using court time efficiently. The defense agreed and said they understand the court's concerns. But stepping back for a moment, this case already seems to be off to a rough start, and that's not a great sign. Now, here's another key issue that came up during the hearing, something the defense described as a problem with adversarial testing. In simple terms, they argue that they're being put in a position where they cannot properly challenge the evidence. The state wants certain reports admitted, but the defense says they haven't been given the underlying data needed to verify or question those reports. That's a serious problem, because under the law, especially in a case as serious, both sides are supposed to have access to the same information through a process called discovery. That's what allows each side to examine evidence, challenge it, and build their case. But according to defense, that process hasn't been followed here. They also pointed out that this isn't just a technical issue. It touches on constitutional rights, including the right to a fair trial and the ability to confront evidence being used against you. And when you're dealing with a case of this magnitude, the standard for reliability is even higher. Now, let me add something important here. There's been talk about wanting to move this trial along quickly, to wrap it up as soon as possible. But when you look at everything that's happening, that urgency starts to feel questionable. Because the longer a case goes on, the more time there is for people to examine the details, ask questions, and uncover potential issues. And it also gives the defense more time to properly prepare. So the push to speed things up, that raises some eyebrows. Trials like this don't usually move fast. They take time. In fact, many cases never even make it a full trial. They get resolved beforehand. But here, you have a situation where key evidence hasn't even been shared, and yet the process is still moving forward. That's why the defense is essentially saying, how can we move ahead when we don't even have the data we need? The hearing itself went on for hours, but at a certain point, you have to ask, what exactly are you debating if the core evidence isn't even available? The defense made it clear that they're not asking for a delay just for the sake of it. They want a fair opportunity to properly examine and challenge the expert reports being presented. And until they receive the data from the FBI and ATF, they argue that meaningful testing of that evidence simply isn't possible. The defense also argued that the state is trying to introduce evidence under Statute 1102 in a way that bypasses proper review. Their position is simple. You can't just walk into court and suddenly present FBI or ATF reports as evidence without giving the defense time to actually examine them. Because once that information is entered, it becomes part of the official record. And according to the defense, they must be given adequate time to review it before it can be considered reliable. They stress that this isn't just a procedural preference. It's about constitutional fairness. In their view, proper discovery must happen first before any so-called reliable hearsay can be accepted by the court. The defense also made a broader legal argument, stating that if the court allows evidence and without full access to the underlying data, then the application of that statute in this case could be unconstitutional. On the other hand, they acknowledge that if full discovery is provided and they are given enough time to review everything, then the state would have met its obligations, and the evidence could be properly evaluated under the law. At its core, the argument is about balance, making sure both sides have equal access before the court relies on any reports or summaries. Now, shifting slightly, another interesting part of the hearing involved testimony from an expert in social behavior. This witness wasn't aligned with either side, not the prosecution, not the defense. Their role was to observe how public communication and media coverage can influence perception in high-profile cases. During the session, the court reviewed several media clips from major news outlets, including Fox News and NBC News. These clips discuss Tyler Robinson in very strong terms, even though he has not been convicted of anything at this stage. The expert pointed out a major concern, that media narratives can shape public opinion long before a jury is ever selected. And that matters, because in a case like this, potential jurors are also members of the public. If they've already been exposed to repeated messaging that someone is guilty, it becomes much harder to ensure a completely unbiased trial later on. The discussion highlighted how language used in media coverage can unintentionally influence how people interpret evidence, even before it's formally presented in court. Some of the clips shown in court use very strong descriptions of Robinson's character and alleged actions. The expert noted that this type of framing can become problematic when a case is still legally unresolved. They also emphasize that juries are expected to base decisions only on evidence presented in court, not on media coverage or public commentary. Another major point raised during testimony focused on victims and how they are supported throughout the legal process. The expert stressed that in serious criminal cases, there's often a victim-centered approach, where law enforcement works closely with victims and their families to keep them informed and supported. However, they also acknowledge the importance of maintaining fairness and avoiding external pressure on the judicial process. They strongly warned against conspiracy theories and misinformation spreading online, saying that it can undermine investigations and distort public understanding of the case. At the same time, they expressed confidence in law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation, stating that these cases are handled by experienced professionals and that the process is designed to be thorough and careful. In their view, the justice system depends on trust, procedure, and patience, and rushing or distorting that process can create more harm than clarity. Ultimately, as the hearing wrapped up, one thing became clear. This case is not just about evidence, but also about procedure, fairness, public perception, and how all these factors interact in a high-profile trial. The defense also argued that the state is trying to introduce evidence under Statute 1102 in a way that bypasses proper review. Their position is simple. You can't just walk into court and suddenly present FBI or ATF reports as evidence without giving the defense time to actually examine them, because once that information is entered, it becomes part of the official record. And according to the defense, they must be given adequate time to review it before it can be considered reliable. They stress that this isn't just a procedural preference. It's about constitutional fairness. In their view, proper discovery must happen first before any so-called reliable hearsay can be accepted by the court.